The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 6. The Objective and Subjective Views of Life. The principle of individualism is the liberty of the human being regarded as a separate existence to develop himself and fulfill his life, satisfy his mental tendencies, emotional and vital needs, and physical being, according to his own desire, governed by his reason. It admits no other limit to this right and this liberty, except the obligation to respect the same individual liberty and right in others. The balance of this liberty and this obligation is the principle which the individualistic age adopted in its remodeling of society. It adopted, in effect, a harmony of compromises between rights and duties, liberty and law, permissions and restraints, as the scheme both of the personal life and the life of the society. Equally, in the life of nations, the individualistic age made liberty the ideal, and strove, though with less success than in its own proper sphere, to affirm a mutual respect for each other's freedom as the proper conduct of nations to one another. In this idea of life, as with the individual, so with the nation, each has the inherent right to manage its own affairs freely, or, if it wills, to mismanage them freely, and not to be interfered with in its rights and liberties, so long as it does not interfere with the rights and liberties of other nations. As a matter of fact, the egoism of individual and nation does not wish to abide within these bounds. Therefore, the social law of the nation has been called in to enforce the violated principle as between man and man, and it has been sought to develop international law in the same way and with the same object. The influence of these ideas is still powerful. In the recent European struggle, the liberty of nations was set forth as the ideal for which the war was being waged, in defiance of the patent fact that it had come about by nothing better than a clash of interests. The development of international law into an effective force which will restrain the egoism of nations, as the social law restrains the egoism of individuals, is the solution which still attracts and seems the most practicable to most when they seek to deal with the difficulties of the future. And we have the first footnote here. No longer, perhaps now, except with a dwindling minority, now that the League of Nations, constantly misused or hampered from its true functioning by the egoism and insincerity of its greater members, has collapsed into impotence and failure. The growth of modern science has meanwhile created new ideas and tendencies. On one side, an exaggerated individualism, or rather vitalistic egoism; on the other, the quite opposite ideal of collectivism. Science, investigating life, discovered that the root nature of all living is a struggle to take the best advantage of the environment for self-preservation, self-fulfillment, self-aggrandizement. Human thought, seizing in its usual arbitrary and trenchant fashion upon this aspect of modern knowledge, has founded on it theories of a novel kind, which erect into a gospel the right for each to live his own life, not merely by utilizing others, but even at the expense of others. The first object of life, in this view, is for the individual to survive as long as he may, to become strong, efficient, powerful, to dominate his environment and his fellows, and to raise himself on this strenuous and egoistic line to his full stature of capacity, and reap his full measure of enjoyment. Philosophies like Nietzsche's, certain forms of anarchism, not the idealistic anarchism of the thinker, which is rather the old individualism of the ideal reason carried to its logical conclusion. Certain forms, too, of imperialism have been largely influenced and strengthened by this type of ideas, though not actually created by them. On the other hand, science investigating life has equally discovered that not only is the individual life best secured and made efficient by association with others and subjection to a law of communal self-development rather than by aggressive self-affirmation, but that actually what nature seeks to preserve is not the individual, but the type, and that in her scale of values, the pack, herd, hive, or swarm takes precedence over the individual animal or insect, and the human group over the individual human being. Therefore, in the true law and nature of things, the individual should live for all, and constantly subordinate and sacrifice himself to the growth, efficiency, and progress of the race, rather than live for his own self-fulfillment and subordinate the race life to his own needs. Modern collectivism derives its victorious strength from the impression made upon human thought by this opposite aspect of modern knowledge. We have seen how the German mind took up both these ideas and combined them on the basis of the present facts of human life. It affirmed the entire subordination of the individual to the community, nation or state. It affirmed, on the other hand, with equal force, the egoistic self-assertion of the individual nation as against others, or against any group or all the groups of nations which constitute the totality of the human race. But behind this conflict, between the idea of a nationalistic and imperialistic egoism, and the old individualistic doctrine of individual and national liberty and separateness, there is striving to arise a new idea of human universalism or collectivism for the race, which, if it succeeds in becoming a power, is likely to overcome the ideal of national separatism and liberty, as it has overcome within the society itself the ideal of individual freedom and separate self-fulfillment. This new idea demands of the nation that it shall subordinate, if not merge and sacrifice, its free separateness to the life of a larger collectivity, whether that of an imperialistic group or a continental or cultural unity, as in the idea of a united Europe, or the total unified life of the human race. The principle of subjectivism entering into human thought and action, while necessarily it must make a great difference in the viewpoint, the motive power, and the character of our living, does not at first appear to make any difference in its factors. Subjectivism and objectivism start from the same data. The individual and the collectivity, the complex nature of each with its various powers of the mind, life, and body, and the search for the law of their self-fulfillment and harmony. But objectivism, proceeding by the analytical reason, takes an external and mechanical view of the whole problem. It looks at the world as a thing, an object, a process to be studied by an observing reason, which places itself abstractly outside the elements and the sum of what it has to consider, and observes it thus from outside, as one would an intricate mechanism. The laws of this process are considered as so many mechanical rules or settled forces acting upon the individual or the group, which, when they have been observed and distinguished by the reason, have by one's will or by some will to be organized and applied fully much as science applies the laws it discovers. These laws or rules have to be imposed on the individual by his own abstract reason and will, isolated as a ruling authority from his other parts, or by the reason and will of other individuals or of the group, and they have to be imposed on the group itself, either by its own collective reason and will, embodied in some machinery of control, which the mind considers as something apart from the life of the group, or by the reason and will of some other group external to it, or of which it is in some way a part. So the state is viewed in modern political thought as an entity in itself, as if it were something apart from the community and its individuals, something which has the right to impose itself on them and control them in the fulfillment of some idea of right, good, or interest which is inflicted on them by a restraining and fashioning power, rather than developed in them and by them as a thing towards which their self and nature are impelled to grow. Life is to be managed, harmonized, perfected by an adjustment, a manipulation, a machinery through which it is passed and by which it is shaped. A law outside oneself, outside even when it is discovered or determined by the individual reason, and accepted or enforced by the individual will. This is the governing idea of objectivism, a mechanical process of management, ordering, perfection. This is its conception of practice.